Welcome, everyone, to the Bridging the Gap podcast. Our mission here is to encourage, equip, and empower every woman on her faith journey with Jesus Christ. Today, we are thrilled to welcome back to the podcast husband, father, and businessman Derek Staaland as he joins our host, McKelty Bloom, for a fascinating conversation around tithing, offering, and generosity. Derek shares his financial testimony. Seeing God come through with provision in such big ways grew a desire to teach on the importance of tithing and giving back to God what is his. Finances can be a touchy subject. Derek and McKelty break down why that is and provide for us a helpful way of looking at our finances as a reflection of our faith journey. They also break down the difference between tithing and offering with many biblical principles on the subject. If you're someone who sometimes struggles with finances or the thought of, I can't afford to tithe, you will be so encouraged by this episode. And I think it's one of the best for understanding tithing. So now, without further ado, here's our conversation with Derek Staaland. Derek, welcome back to the podcast. This is your second time around. Yes. I was trying to remember, you guys had to have joined 2 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, you and your wife, Carrie. I can't remember fully.
Yeah, I think it was right around that time frame, 2 or 3 years ago. So now I'm going solo. So you get the lesser half of the two of us, but yes.
No, I really loved that conversation, but I am equally excited for this conversation solo with you. It's actually, a topic that Angie has been saying, if you ever want someone to talk about, tithing and generosity and biblical principles, you need to connect with Derek. She's been truly, hyping you up for about 2 years now. So.
Well, she's definitely a hype man, and I appreciate her saying that. But it's definitely something that I'm very passionate about, and done a lot of study, research, prayer. It's something that certainly has become like a life message for me, for sure.
Oh, I love it. And I cannot wait to dive into it. And, for those maybe who haven't listened to the one with you and Carrie, would you mind quick just introducing yourself for people who don't know you, just a little bit about who you are before we get started?
Sure. So again, my name's Derek, married to Carrie. We actually graduated or went to North Central way back in the day, back in the late 90s. And actually tomorrow is our 26th wedding anniversary. So, and that's what I know we had talked about before, was marriage, and another one of our passions. We have 3 amazing kids. Reagan is going to be a senior at North Central. Lauren is going to a leadership college at our church. And then my son is going to be a sophomore in high school. So we're certainly busy there, but Carrie stays at home and I work. So it's been a great, part of our testimony, our financial testimony that we'll talk about here, was having her stay home. I know that's not for everybody, but part of what we felt like God had laid on our hearts was we wanted her to stay home with our kids. And, I think I'll get into some of the details later, but the financial testimony of how God came through for that situation was mind-boggling. And so that's kind of how we've had it now for the last 21 years, and God's continued to be faithful with it.
No, I love that. And really a plug for anyone listening. If you have not listened to that episode on marriage, it was such a good one with so much rich content, so many practical things and talking about marriage. So you need to go back and listen to that one if you have not already. But so we've kind of alluded to a little bit what we're going to talk about today, and financial aspects and generosity. And I don't want anyone to hear that and then I don't want to talk about finance and tune out, because there is so much richness and so much depth when you are talking about biblical principles when it comes to this topic. And for myself, just sharing a little bit that I've always grown up in the church. I've always heard the word tithing, and it felt like this mundane responsibility, just being honest in what that was. But truly over the last 4 or 5 years, I have just had my eyes opened to what it really means to live a life in this way, and how it isn't just that responsibility and what we're supposed to do, but the richness that comes from it, and how it does help you grow in your relationship with the Lord when you're living your life obedient to what the Bible says you should be doing. Surprise, that works. Exactly. But so it's been so cool to see my eyes open in that way. But can you just start us out by just sharing a little bit of your heart behind, why you love talking about this stuff, why it's important that we need to be diving into it?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I've done a lot of teaching on finances and tithing and giving. And One thing that I think, if we could start off with this, is I believe that when you talk about your finances, it's actually the second most important decision that you're going to make in your walk with God. So the
Mm,
first important decision is obviously giving your life to God. But the second most important decision is, what are you going to do with your finances? And I believe that because in Matthew 6, it talks about there's only two masters that you can serve, God or mammon or money, however you look at that. And so you really think about the difference here. God could have put anything else there that you could serve. It didn't have to be money. It was anything
mm,
else. And God said, hey, there's only two. It's either me or you serve money. And so
mm,
that's why I believe that in the church, talking about finances has become very, very difficult. And I believe it's kind of a work of the enemy because he knows, hey, you only get two choices, God or mammon or money. Which
mm,
one are you going to serve? And that's where I believe tithing and giving always keeps our heart in the right spot. Because tithing, and we'll talk about it a little bit, but in my opinion, it's giving the first tenth of your income to God. And I always talk about the first because many people, wait till the end and then say, God, I only have this left. So here you
mm.
go. Where it's really, in my opinion, it doesn't have to be a rote and ritual, but I definitely try to pay the tithe first. When we get paid, I want that to be, at least in my heart, one of the first things that goes out, because I want to say, God, this is yours. And I believe the tithe, if you look at scripture, is actually God's portion of your income. And, we could dive into some of those details, but he then redeems the rest of your income. So he's
Mm.
saying, if you trust me with the first 10%, make me number one in your finances, I'll make your 90% go way beyond what you ever dreamed. And again, that's part of our testimony. But most of the people that I've seen throughout my 40 years of following God that have walked away from God, they are not tithing. Because I
Mm.
believe that when you're tithing, you are giving your heart to God. It's not about the money. God doesn't care about how much money he gets from you. He's saying, where am I in portion and in line with your priorities? Am I number one? That's what the tithe really represents. And if you look all through scripture, tithe, which is a tenth, the number 10 always represents God testing people. It's
Hmm.
very, very interesting. I mean, how many plagues were there, right? I mean, you look at all these things, number 10 always represents a test. And so I believe that literally every time you get paid, God is allowing us to either pass or try again. I never say fail, but try again, because he's saying, hey, I'm testing you. Am I number one in your heart when it comes to your finances?
Mm, that's good. That's good. And can you clarify here, what is the difference between tithe and offering? Because that often goes hand in hand in
Yep.
churches. And it's like, well, wait, what is the difference between this?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the tithe, in my opinion, is like the baseline. That's the first 10%. And again, as I talked about it, in my belief, from what I've looked at and read in scripture, I believe that God says the tithe is his. That is his portion of our income. After the 10%, that's where it's offerings. And God does not require us to give offerings. He wants us to give offerings out of a generous heart, but that is not necessarily required. Now, if your heart is in the right spot with finances, normally people that tithe are going to give offerings as well. And it's not about the amount, it's about the overflow of the gratitude you have for God and the generosity that he's placed. And you see that all through Paul's letters, to the church of Corinth, all of those things. He's constantly talking about this heart of generosity that all these people have. Even if you look at the church of Corinth, he was talking about, where I think it was the church of Macedonia, where they had nothing. They gave out of their poverty, he said. And it's just simply because it was an overflow of generosity of their heart that they were so longing to be involved in what he was doing.
Yeah, I someone just said last week this statement and it stuck with me that tithing is what you owe and then offering are the seeds you sow. And I really loved that frame because it goes exactly to what you're saying. It's like, this is
Yep.
what we owe. This is our 10%. And then the offering is that extra. We're sowing into other people, having generous hearts. And I think that is a great reminder of like when we are living within that 10% and we're giving and following that provision, like to see your heart just grow with like, I just want to do more. Like it's that
Yep.
posture of your heart that goes more towards God and like wanting to just be this generous person, which I know we'll talk about a little bit later in the podcast. But let's kind of just start from the beginning of, what does the Bible say? You've given so many great examples already, but what does it really break down to of, this is what, Jesus says about this. This is what everyone else in the Bible and Paul says about why we do this. What does it really mean to tithe? And maybe just some like biblical points.
Yeah, so it's a great question. So, the biggest thing that comes up when we talk about tithing is so many people are like, well, that's an Old Testament principle. All right. And that's probably an entire podcast on our own.
Yeah.
But when we talk about tithing, yes, it was an old covenant principle, but many times you don't see the old covenant principles like do not murder, all these things not shift over to the new covenant, right? Mm-hmm. So it's not like God's going to say, hey, that was old. This is new. You don't have to tithe anymore. Now, again, people can go through and interpret how they want, but Jesus actually talked about tithing in Matthew 23:23. He talked about tithing versus having a better attitude. And if you go through that verse, no matter how you read it, he's saying you should tithe. And I would encourage people to look up Matthew 23:23 and kind of go through that, because that's where Jesus really talks about tithing. But in my opinion, the best spot to look is in Malachi 3. And Malachi 3 really talks about, where if you remember, it says, you have robbed me. And then Malachi saying, how have we robbed you? And he said, in tithes and offerings. And what's so interesting, McKelty, about that word robbed, because I've done just a ton of research, this is like one of my favorite verses, because you look at it and you say, okay, when you look at the word robbed, it does mean that you're stealing from God, to your point. And I believe that the 10th, the first tithe, is God's. But what also, there's a second definition of that word robbed, and it actually means to wear a helmet or a hood. And so what I believe God is saying there is, listen, you are wearing a helmet or a hood, and you're praying for me to bless you, but you're not tithing. You're not giving offerings. So literally, I'm trying to pour blessing out on you, but you don't know it because you're wearing a hood, you're wearing a helmet. And what God is asking us to do is he's saying, stop robbing me of the opportunity to bless you. Take the hood off, take your helmet off, begin to tithe, trust me. And if you read Malachi 3, and I know it's just something from my heart, but every time I tithe, I read that and declare that over our tithe. But God says, listen, I will open up the windows of heaven and pour out blessing that you will not be able to receive. I mean, the promises in there are beyond anything of our wildest dreams. And God is simply saying, take your hood off. Let me pour out blessing on you. Stop robbing me of the opportunity to pour out blessing on you.
And a lot of that comes with having trust and faith, right? That God is going to show up in those seasons. And when you're looking at trust and provision and how God does provide, like that's a huge element of our faith, is knowing that God has us even when it doesn't make sense. And I think, I'm wondering if you could just speak to those people right now that I've heard this so many times of like, I can't give right now. I mean, $100 is so much money and I need it right now. And, wouldn't God understand, and those types of pieces. But I don't know, just if you could speak to that element of what it really means to have faith that the Lord will provide through this element of finances.
Well, that's a great question. And I think it's the biggest struggle that people have, because so many people are living paycheck to paycheck already. And I would say two things. Number one, what you're doing isn't working. Okay, because it's not God's best. And again, I don't say that to judge people. I say that to encourage them to say, listen, this is God's best for your finances. But the way that I envision it, McKelty, is I envision myself sitting at a desk and I'm writing out the bills. And everybody that I'm writing a bill to is standing in line in front of me at the desk, right? So you've got your mortgage company, you've got your car, you've got your cell phone, you've got, your air conditioner, whatever it is. You've got all these people lined up waiting to get a check from you. And what most of us do is they have Jesus at the end of the line. So they write out all the bills and then they get to the end and Jesus is standing there and we're like, hey, this is all I have left. To your point, I don't have anything else. I can't afford to do it. And I believe Jesus, in all of his love, again, with no judgment at all, all he's saying as we look in line, I believe sometimes, and this is just the way I picture it, that I look down the line and Jesus is at the end, and all he's saying is, put me to the front. Let me get in the front of the line, give me the tithe first, and I'm going to take care of the rest of this. But if you keep putting me to the end of the line, I can't do anything with the rest of your money. Because again, once you give the tithe, he redeems the rest of it. But what we do is we give out the rest of it first, and we don't allow him the opportunity. And that's where trust comes in, because giving the first takes faith to take that step. And that is the hardest step people can take when it comes to your finances.
Yeah. And I would encourage people to just try it. If you have never tithed, if you've never done it, just try it and see what happens and see how God shows up. And just from my personal testimony, we're a young married couple. We have little kids and expensive daycare. My husband owns his own business. Like, there's a lot that goes into it. And I have truly seen the biggest miracles in my life and the biggest acts of God showing up and providing through our finances. It's actually through tithing and finances that my faith has grown the most within the last year, which people don't think of, finances being a big faith grower in a lot of ways. It's other aspects, but just to share the story of it, in January, my husband's a contractor, so work is hard in winter, and we moved to a different city. It's hard to get established. And we were literally on the nickels and pennies getting through the month, and I just remember tears streaming down my eyes as I tithe sometimes, because I'm like, I don't know how we're going to do it, but I know I need to give you back what is yours. This is yours. And even though this is hard, I'm giving it with a heart of gratitude, because you always show up and you always provide. And then we got through that month, and I believe I'm going to hold on to faith that he's going to provide. He always does. And then this year for taxes, we got the largest tax return back that we've ever gotten, and to the point where I was like, you recheck it, something has to be off. But there were just these little things that added up, and I just knew in my heart in that moment, that is from the Lord. It was from, and it just felt like this internal thing of, thank you for trusting me. Thank you for putting me first, even when it was hard and it would have been easy to save that money, but I'm just going to show up for you in a big way now. So I just wanted to share that for people, because I just feel like there's those little aspects of when we do trust God, even if it's tears streaming down our face, I don't know how this is going to work. He always shows up in big ways.
No doubt about it. I mean, as I think about our testimonies in our 26 years of marriage, almost all of them that we have had have come because of financial, testimonies, gifts, things that we have believed God for. In fact, I was alluding to it before, so I'll just share this story real quickly. But, so when we first got married in '99, I was sitting in a Sunday school class, and one of the teachers read Deuteronomy 8:18, where it says, God will give you the power to get wealth. And I remember sitting there thinking to myself, I really want that to be true, but I don't believe it. So I went home and I said, God, if this is true, then I want you to show me your plan for finances. So this is how this whole journey started now 26 years ago or so. And throughout that time, God started to build my faith in finances. Well, when we began to want to have a family, so this is in early 2000s, I didn't make much money. Carrie didn't make much money. So I said, God, I need to make X amount of dollars for Carrie to stay home. And this new job came available. And it was just yes, this is amazing, God. This is what you want us to do. We felt peace about it. So we took this job, the job that I have now. And for the first 18 months, I was absolutely awful at this job. I didn't make a dollar for 18 months. And I'm thinking to myself, God, you led us here. This is where you led us. And during that time, we found out that we were pregnant. And I remember the enemy, you have 9 months left. You have 8 months left. There's no way God is going to come through for you. Literally, my mind, there's a countdown. Well, during that time, things were so bad that I worked on commission. I owed my company $10,000 in back paid commission that they had paid me that I hadn't earned. And so I went to God and said, God, listen, we have 3 months left. I need you to give me a plan. And at that time, we had about $1,100 left to our name. That's all we had. And I felt like God said, I want you to give $1,000 offering this Sunday.
Hmm.
And I literally remember saying to God, that's a terrible idea. Like, I don't know what you think. That's just a really bad idea, God. I want another plan. And I just kept going through, kept praying, asked Carrie about it. Yep, I feel peace. So just like your story, I mean, when I brought that offering, I was literally crying, not because I was sad about giving it up, but just like, God, I'm all in. And
Mm-hmm.
I believe that God brings us all to a point of where we have to decide, are we all in or are we not all in with our finances?
Good.
And that's where this comes. That's where everyone comes to this point. And it's not just once in your life. It happens time and time and time again. And so at that time, we gave the money. Nothing happened for a couple months. We literally are in the hospital. Carrie had Reagan. I got a call that one of the cases we were working on came through. I was able to pay back the $10,000 and made another $10,000 on that one case. And
Wow.
from that point on, she's been able to stay home. And so when I tell people that God has literally changed my life by trusting him with my finances, it's not an understatement. And sometimes I can't even explain the degree of how much he's changed my life, because that one moment set the stage then to say, okay, I trust you no matter what the dollar amount is. He's asked me to give way more than $1,000, over the last couple of years. It doesn't matter. I'm like, I am in. I trust you because I know you have a better plan than what I have.
Yeah. It feels like it just goes to this obedience. Like in both of our stories, I'm listening and thinking, I'm like, it's this heart of obedience. And God is always looking for the one that's going to be obedient, even if it's hard. And that goes into our finances too. And I
Yeah.
always just think of that saying with it, of how am I supposed to trust you with a lot if I can't trust you with a little? And so many people have the excuse, I guess, is what it is of, well, if I just had more, then I could. If I just had
Yep.
more finances, I'd be more comfortable. But it's really looking at how I picture it of, are you totally going to give all to God, your full surrender? And if that's true, then that includes your finances. And how often sometimes we could say, oh, well, I'll give him my marriage, I'll give him my kids, I'll give him my career, but I can't give him my money, like that's too stressful for me.
But that goes back to what I originally said. I actually think that the finances should be your next decision. Once you give your life to God, now you've got to decide, am I all in? And that a lot of people miss that part because now that's giving your heart. But remember, you talk about a lot of people say, well, I don't have enough. One of the greatest stories in the Bible that Jesus highlights is the story of the widow and the mite. Mm-hmm. And if you look at that story, the mite is actually worth a half of a penny. There's not actually even money today that's worth what she had. It was that small. And Jesus highlights her as one of the greatest givers in the Bible. And so you think about that, like she gave a half of a penny. And Jesus said, this lady gave more than any of you. And so that's where I know it's not about a dollar amount. Jesus literally doesn't care. What he cares about is, am I first? And do you trust me? And to your point, are you going to obey? Because the word obey actually means to hear and to act. It's not just like, I'm going to obey because, I know you're going to punish me or whatever. This is, I hear what you say, and I'm now going to take action on what I hear you say. And that's really what we're doing with our finances.
Calling all women in leadership. We want to invite you to the 2026 BTG Leadership Conference in beautiful Alexandria, Minnesota, next February 20th through 21st. We are honored to have innovative leader and Pastor Christy Kerr keynoting this event, along with multiple workshops providing practical training, networking with other leaders, and much needed space for relaxation and fun. We believe every woman is a potential leader, and we have intentionally crafted this time to resource and refresh you in your leadership journey. Check out the website for more information at mnbtg.org/leadership.
How have you seen people's lives change, and more so like their attitude and the posture of their hearts change, their faith change when they start living in these principles? I'm not sure. I know I'm putting you on the spot. If you have any stories or things that you've just seen from people.
Listen, no one that I've talked to, and it's literally been hundreds and hundreds of couples that we've walked through with this. No one that tithes comes back and says, I wish I didn't tithe. Now, does that mean that it's not going to be difficult? No, we've walked through some very difficult situations. And in fact, sometimes I believe that when you start tithing, the enemy perks up and is like, hey, there might be some attacks that come. I'm not going to say they're all from the enemy, but it certainly can happen. And we've seen that happen. But the testimony of people that tithe, all of them say, God is faithful beyond anything that I can ever imagine. And the people that don't tithe are always the ones that say, I don't have enough and I don't know how we're going to make it. And again, everyone's on a journey. And what I encourage people to do is sometimes it's tough to go from 0 to 10%. So I encourage people to say, listen, get on a journey of generosity. Now, the ultimate goal, I believe, is to get to 10% to tithe and then give offerings beyond that. I believe that's God's best. But I also know that sometimes that feels impossible. So be encouraged. Just take one step. Say, okay, we're going to start giving 1% right now, 2%, 5%. God, I'm believing that we're going to get to X amount. Now, again, tithing is the best way to do it. But sometimes that's a journey of paying off debt, of maybe selling your home and downsizing. There are some dramatic things that you can do to really get to a spot where you can feel like you can put God first, but making the decision is the biggest part. If you don't, the longer you wait, the harder it gets.
Yeah, that's true. That's so true. And I think, going back to what we started talking about at the beginning of with offerings and what that does to our heart. Like I've seen in my life personally, when I started to consistently tithe and have it be more of a excitement and an act of worship instead of that responsibility, I have just seen my own heart just bloom with wanting to give to others and wanting to live generously. And, when there's kids that are raising funds for missions, they ask for 20. I'm like, how much do you have left? And I want to cover all of it. And it's not remotely because I have the money to do that at all. That's actually not a smart decision, but it truly comes from this act of, I want to give back because I, know that the Lord is going to provide because he always does. And I do think he gives us that heart to live generously to those around us and to give and have hearts of being a gracious giver. So what does it really mean, when we're talking about this as a whole, to live just generously with our money and with our offerings?
Yeah, and it's a great question. And again, when you talk about tithing, I look at that as making God the first. That's not generosity. So generosity comes when you start giving offerings, right? So tithing is getting your heart right. Offerings is above and beyond that. And when you look at 2 Corinthians 9, it talks about giving with a purpose. Each person has purposed in their heart to give. And so a lot of times what Carrie and I do, and we started this a couple years ago, because for a while I was really stuck on giving a certain percentage of our income. I want to give 20%. I want to give 30%, whatever that number is. And I got really, really stuck on that percentage. So I give the tithe and then I give X amount. Well, what we started doing was I started making a giving account. So I put every month in a certain amount of money, setting aside for offerings. And I wait for God to tell us, this is where I want you to give. Because sometimes, like this has happened many times, where God's like, I want you to buy that person a car. Well, if I've already given all the money away, I don't have that money available to give them a car. You know what I mean? Just because I felt like, hey, every month I want to give this as an offering. And I feel like sometimes God's saying, hey, let me speak to you. It's another way we can learn to hear from God. Let me speak to you about who I want you to give to and what I want you to give and how much I want you to give. Because those have been some of the biggest blessings for us. I mean, you talk about buying a car for single moms or widows. That has been so rewarding for our family to just be able to watch that. But that is because God is saying, here's my best for your family. And it's going to be different for everybody. But I would encourage people to ask God, what do you want me to know about our finances? And what do you want me to do about it? Because every family is different. Our family, God's called us to give to different things than he's called your family to give to. That doesn't mean that one is wrong, one is right. In fact, if you look back at the biblical tithing, they actually gave 3 different tithes that equaled about 23% of their income. And I won't go into all the details, but God is saying, I have different purposes for everyone. don't get too stuck on the percentage, but get stuck on who I want you to give to and the generosity of that, so I can speak to you and learn that relationship part of it. I think you brought that up earlier. Finances are not about God getting money. He has enough money. He doesn't need our money. He wants a relationship with us. And this is a great way to build that relationship, is through finances and generosity.
I'm so glad you brought that up, and you brought up the importance of asking God and seeking God and praying about it, because there can become a point, this is just coming to me now, of pride. Like that could easily sneak in, of like, look at, I can give to all these people, look at me go. And you could get a little wild with it, but the importance of truly seeking, what do you want me to do with this? And I think that it's a beautiful mix of living selflessly, but then also being wise and having that aspect. And, that's something we do, the same thing, where if I'm feeling led to give something to someone, I always ask my husband, hey, can you pray about this too? And let me know what you think. And it's really cool to say, like, what amount are you getting? And typically our amounts add up to be the same. And then I'm like, okay, then this is the Lord. This is confirmation. We're supposed to do this. We both got that same number. And having accountability can be really nice. And so making sure, like, if you're married in a relationship, that you're walking with them together, and you're both encouraging them and saying, what is the Lord telling you? What is the Lord telling me? And that's a great way to connect as well. But truly seeking and being prayerful as you're going through this journey as well.
No doubt about it. And I mean, I think you especially for us that go to church consistently or are part of a church, there's plenty of opportunities to give. And this is just my personal belief. I don't know that God has called us to give to every opportunity. Again, tithing is separate, but I believe that God's going to place on your heart who he wants you to give to and the amounts. And like even this last week, I felt like God wanted us to give some money to a family that had some car repairs that were unexpected. And I stalled out on it. It was, we went on vacation, all this stuff, and I was praying about it. And I just felt like God kind of generously and gently said, why are you waiting? I asked you to do this. Like, this is about listening and obeying and walking through and doing that. So I immediately was like, hey, called the family and got it done, because I do think there is a relationship part of listening. One of the biggest things that we need to learn is how to hear from God. And our finances is one of those ways that we can learn how to hear from God. And what's great about it, McKelty, is if we think we hear from God and we made a mistake, God's not going to come back and say, I never told you to give that money. Now we're done. You know what I mean? Because he sees we have a heart of generosity. We made a mistake in trying to be too generous. Right. And so that's the great part about God. What'd you say?
I was like, oh, darn. Right. It's like, well,
Exactly. But in this scenario where he was like, hey, I asked you to give, we have a relationship where if I asked you to give, then I want you to give it. And that I love that. Not that I love hearing, hey, why didn't you do what I asked you to do? But it just was a reminder to me that this is about listening to God and hearing, and then simply obeying what he's asking you to do.
Yeah. One of my favorite things that I've ever heard, and I speak about it too, is that delayed obedience is still disobedience. And so making sure that in those moments, it could be like, you have to be giving in that moment because it's a crucial time or something like that. So when you feel that nudge, still having wisdom, still seeking and making sure like, oh, is this right? Because I'm someone where I'm like, oh my gosh, I would love to do this, or I'd love to help with that. And it's like, pause, reflect. But if you're feeling that, okay, I've asked you to give, to your point, like, what are you waiting for? What are you waiting for in that aspect? So I just think that's a really powerful reminder.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah. So, I mean, as we're kind of getting close to the end of our time together, just what are some just maybe final things that you wish you could have shared and we didn't get to yet? Any other points that you want to take home, or just some maybe final encouragement for people who just really struggle with this, really struggle with the trust aspect, really are just in financially difficult situations. So it's hard to put themselves out in this avenue. Anything else that you have to share with us here?
Well, I know this is going to sound a little bit strange to maybe end with this, but what I find is the biggest hindrance for people tithing or giving offerings, whatever, you're wherever you are in the journey, is that fear takes over. And I actually just did a message at our church. I get to speak like a couple of times a year. And I just did this last Sunday, a message on fear. And I have struggled with fear my entire life. Like, it has really been a struggle for me. but I've really been on a journey with God about how to deal with fear. And first of all, admitting to Jesus that you have a fear of finances is, in my opinion, the first step. So identifying it, he already knows that we have a fear, right? So if you're struggling with tithing and you're like, I just can't do it, a lot of times we just try to turn our head in shame almost, like, all right, hey, I don't want to talk about this, Jesus. But in my opinion, that's him inviting us to say, come to me, tell me about your fear. Jesus, I don't believe that you can come through for us. I don't trust you with my finances. And then you go to him and say that same question, what do you want me to know about this fear? And what do you want me to do about it? And he's always going to be gentle. That's what I love about, God, when we're dealing with fear. Even if you think about the story of the disciples in the boat, when the boat was sinking and they came to him yelling, don't you care that we're perishing? Do you think Jesus knew that there was a storm coming? He knew there was a storm coming. And he also knew that this fear would be risen up, would come up inside of them. And I believe that he did that to reveal to the disciples, you still have fear and you don't trust me. Not to mock them, not to shame them, but to allow it to be identified so he can deal with it. Because then he simply asks them a question, why are you so fearful? And I think that's what he's asking a lot of us to do. So I know it's a strange way to end talking about finances, but in my opinion, it is the reason people stop is fear. So if you have fear about tithing, about giving offerings, whatever it is, tell Jesus what your fear is and ask him, what do you want me to know about it? And what do you want me to do? And let him, in that invitation, let him guide you on a journey that he will lead and not you leading it out of guilt or shame.
I think that's a perfect way to end it. I just think that that is a huge reason and a huge hindrance for people wanting to move forward. And I appreciate you acknowledging it and kind of affirming that that's a normal feeling to feel when it comes to this. So I think it's great to just have those honest emotions and conversations with the Lord, because one, he already knows you're feeling it. So let's just talk about it type of thing. And two, just that encouragement. But I would also encourage people that after this, if you still have questions or if you're still kind of struggling with it or grasping it, to connect with your pastor, connect with somebody that you trust and that is knowledgeable in this area, and just have that conversation with them, and that they can help to guide you and share more on it. But that also makes me think, do you have any resources for people who are wanting to know more about this and to dive deeper in that you'd be willing to share?
Yeah, I've certainly read a lot of different books. Dave Ramsey is out there, but that, in my opinion, Dave Ramsey is more for people that are trying to get their finances in order. And so if you feel like if you're in that spot where you're saying, I can't afford to do this, Dave Ramsey is a great spot to go, because now he can help you kind of get things lined up and in order so that you can put God first and you can begin to tithe. So I think that's a great resource. But honestly, McKelty, I think diving into the scriptures and looking at what he says, especially in 2 Corinthians 9 and Malachi 3, those two verses have really shifted my thinking on giving. Because number one, Malachi 3 talks about the blessing of tithing. If you read through that slowly, anyone in this world that's a Christ follower would say, I want to sign up for that. And all God is saying is, okay, put me first in your finances. Stop robbing me of the opportunity. So Malachi 3 and 2 Corinthians 9, I would just encourage people to meditate on those verses and ask Jesus what he wants you to do with those verses.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for jumping on here today and talking about this. I know it's one of those conversations that my pastor always jokes about in church. Like, I know you're all going to be mad, but we're talking about tithing today, all of those pieces, because it can just be so touchy in the church world and in Christian world and talking about money. But I just really appreciate you normalizing it and pointing it back to scripture of the importance of it and just what it also does to our faith and our relationship with God, because he just wants to build that relationship. He wants there to be trust and to provide in those ways and to show up. So thank you again so much for being on here today.
Well, I appreciate it. And one final thought from what you said there, if you look at what Jesus talked about in the Gospels, he talked about money more than any other subject. So if you think about it, I know what you're saying about church and people, I know we're going to talk about. Jesus didn't shy away from talking about money. And that's why I love talking about this subject, is because Jesus is out there. He created money. He created this system of money. And so he wants you to do it his way, not the world's way, which is what a lot of us have gone down. So I agree with you. I think it's always a tough conversation, but let Jesus guide you and tell him your fear and ask him what he wants you to do with it.
So good. So good. Thank you. Thank you for sharing it all.
Thank you very much. God bless.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Bridging the Gap podcast. We were honored to hear from Derek Staaland on finances and our faith. You can hear more from Derek by checking out his first conversation with the BTG podcast, recorded with his wife, Carrie, on episode 20. You can learn more about Bridging the Gap at mnbtg.org or by following MNBTG on social media. We invite you to take a moment to rate and review this podcast to help others find this resource as well. Thank you for joining us today. We look forward to being with you next time on the Bridging the Gap podcast.